spend much of my time around the world studying really three phenomena. One, urbanization. Secondly, the complex set of economic, social, and environmental aspects to that urbanization. And then how technology can help us address some of the very real challenges we have. So let me tell you a little bit about Living Planet first. We're a technology company, and we focus really on a couple of things. Firstly, how do we improve urban environment and the role of technology within it? And we drive quite significant innovation across a lot of areas. What is becoming very true, and I think one of the most exciting things for me as a technologist, is just how profound the changes that we will all experience will be over the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of the time when we think about technology, we're thinking about digital things. But I will share with you today some work that is being conducted here in Portugal, where we're not just communicating with electronics and silicon, but with biology. And where biology is starting to communicate back to us. I want to start by putting some context around what we have to think about. I think it is too simple to suggest that technology is the solution to everything we are trying to solve. It's much more complex than that. It's complex because in our societies we have huge variation in the way that our communities function, the way our economies run, what our opportunities are, where we are on social development scales, where we geographically are placed, whether we are fortunate like we are in Europe not to be in war-torn areas, or whether we're more unfortunate to be in areas where there's a lot of strife. So we have to look at a very complex set of metrics. These are just some of the Millennium Goals that were developed by the United Nations, and some of them resonate with us in our societies, and some of them resonate with other areas of the world which have deeper problems to address. I do drive better than this usually. Okay. We always look to government and their role in directing our future. And having spent so much time in Portugal, I have to say, and I'm embarrassed to say a little, I think we do that too much here in Portugal. I meet with innovators all the time who look at starting companies to go solve some of these problems, and their business plan starts with a government grant. And the same applies to all other forms of social innovation. Of course, government plays a very important role, but we as citizens, as innovators, whether it be social innovators or technology innovators, business or finance innovators, we drive the evolutions that we're seeing. Government is an important enabler to that. If you can tell me when this moves forward, yeah. Ultimately, we will achieve nothing unless it can be financed. It's the dirty little secret that we all avoid. But there is little understanding yet in how finance achieves better outcomes through smart innovation in cities. And I'm going to share some of those examples today, because the frequent question that I'm always asked is, how do I pay for this stuff? We sort of know where we want to go, but how do I demonstrate the return so I can attract investment? Or that I get a reduction in costs for a municipality? Or that I can launch a business in these sectors? This is going forward and backwards at the moment. Sorry. All right, got it. So I want to talk about Planet Valley for a minute. This has been the greatest love of my life, and also been one of the most frustrating things I've ever undertaken. Planet Valley was a project that we conceived in 2007, 2008. Its basic principle was to bring a place, to develop a place that had a real sense and soul, but where we could bring the world's leading talent across many disciplines together to focus on how we were to evolve smart environments for the rest of the world. And it was a project that we started probably a little naively, because it was way tougher than we could have ever imagined. But we were very lucky to find a municipal president, Celso Ferreira, who had enough vision and, quite frankly, enough balls to take some risks in thinking through this. We've spent, Living Planet, about $50 million in research and development in looking at all aspects of economic, social, and environmental development, the use of the land, the topography, the design, the master plan, the infrastructure, how to produce energy, water, waste, how does mobility work, how do buildings function, how does the economy function within it. This is Portugal's equivalent of what CERN is in Switzerland. They have this big ring in Switzerland where they collide particles. And around it, it has galvanized the world's physicists and innovators. We will start investing heavily in the physical thing, Planet Valley, in this coming year. It's taken us 5 or 6 years with the economy as it's been to get to that point. But it will become initially a research and development site, and then will ultimately, over a number of years, expand to whatever its potential is. But it's a unique asset in this country. And it's not just in the location where it is based, but reflects a broader set of collaboration with universities, municipalities, companies, NGOs, and world participation in major institutions. One of the big challenges we've struggled with in smart urban environments is the backward nature of all developers, master planners, architects, civil engineers, government planners. They are 30 years behind the rest of industry in thinking through complex systems. Particularly, we're entering this really interesting phase where we will see massive disruption. Today, if you look at this chart, this is manufacturing, aerospace, automotive, shipbuilding, submarine manufacturing. And what you see over 30 years is this increase in productivity and the reduction in what it costs things to build and to manage and to operate. And the bottom line happens to be development, construction, operations, maintenance, planning. In fact, in this industry, what's interesting is that 40% of all of the capital deployed for building things, whether roads or buildings, is lost to waste. And that includes inefficient processes, inefficient use of labor, poor use of manufactured goods, theft, and a whole range of other issues. So we had to think about that a lot. Because if we could reduce what it costs to build things, we could use the money we save to invest in new materials, new technologies, new techniques that would turn those assets into smarter things. Over the period, I think, of the last 8 or 9 years, we've been able to show, versus the traditional curve of anything in the smart environment, looking at the traditional urban space, whether it's buildings or infrastructure, those curves are pretty much the blue one. And what we're able to do using new techniques is to get a yield curve that is fundamentally differently. And so whether you're a municipal president, or you're an administrator, or you're a building operator, or you run a road, the difference is immense. And that difference allows us to invest at scale in smart things. We also have to use new tools. This is actually taken from work we did on Planet Valley. And there are 3 simulations here. The one on the left-hand side is how to take a topography, and one of the things that Portugal in the north is blessed with is a lot of hills and a lot of moving territory. And so we had to look at how do you maximize the use of the space, produce less roads, but create more connectivity, reduce traditional transportation, but make it easier for people to move around in an environment. This simulation on the left saves about 12% of the normal infrastructure costs in master planning by looking at hundreds of thousands of permutations in how to best leverage underlying territory. The middle one is interesting. This is use. How do I organize things in my territory so that it engages with the population, both socially and economically? How do we distribute the activities? And how do we create opportunities for people to walk and to move and improve healthcare outcomes while we improve economic and social outcomes? The last one is a bit more fancy. It's running airflow simulations of a city in the same way that we do in Formula One to figure out how high do we build buildings and how small do we build buildings and where do we place them so that we can speed up the air over the top of them to make solar capacity more efficient and slow the air down in the city to keep it at the right temperate climate. We in the development industry, building buildings, used tools that were developed 20 to 25 years ago. This particular tool is used in aircraft manufacturing, shipbuilding, and a whole range of other industries. And it strips out costs and it reduces time to build things. But in the process of delivering those things, we introduce smarter technologies. What you may not be able to quite see on this slide, and certainly for you guys on the web watching this, there are little dots all over this graphic. They are sensing packages that have been poured into concrete as aggregate to look at how concrete cured, how the building moves, structural load, movement of people, and a whole range of other elements, as well as the other systems that are sitting in this final building. I want to give a quick and brief history of just how fast our world of smart is moving. This will be a dominant impact in everything that we consider we want to achieve in enabling better quality of life for us as citizens. We start in the top left-hand corner here. This is a picture from the Hubble telescope, which is looking back to our history of our universe. It's a big sensor with a control unit on it, and it's really good at dealing with pictures with very little light. As you move along, this is the Mars Curiosity rover. It's an independent device moving around, communicating back from Mars, drilling holes, looking at imagery, sending that back to us. Quite advanced. We sent it 6 years ago. Then you start to look at the next things. This is looking back at us from space using non-military satellite imagery. Military satellite imagery can see a golf ball in my hand and the little dents on it. So you see the level and characteristics that we're seeing change. This middle picture here is actually looking at methane gas coming out through the road in San Francisco. Methane is mixed with natural gas so that we humans can smell it if there's going to be an explosion, so that we don't cause an explosion. Here we're looking at methane gas and mapping that into Google Street View to figure out where our pipes are broken in San Francisco. The last one in the middle is human movement. This is a fire exercise in Canary Wharf where an alarm has gone off and people have rushed out of their buildings following whatever processes they have. And we're looking at what humans do when under stress. Where do they aggregate? How do they behave? What do the right-handed people do versus the left-handed people? And how do we improve buildings and urban spaces to improve their safety during those moments? The bottom, it starts to get really funky. The left-hand glass is something that our advanced research team have been working on, and one of my team. Stand up for a moment, Ricardo. This is one of the finest bioinformatics guys, and he's Portuguese. We found him here, initially in a bar. One of the challenges with waste and the way we deal with it today is we tend to package it up, stick it in landfill, or we burn it, and then we turn it back into some basic energy. But we lose all of its value when we do that. Energy is just one of the things we can get from it. This particular thing is actually programming microbes to go digest certain materials. This happens to be Tetra Pak, which you see here frequently in Portugal around your milk and other packaged goods. It doesn't break down in the ground, and therefore it's a huge problem in landfill. This is using a programming method from software to program microbes to digest the petrochemicals, the inks, the glues, and all you end up with is biodiesel or bioethanol and clean aluminium foil. This is a process that just ran incredibly quickly and took no energy other than the microbes themselves. Next one is looking into the ground up to 4 kilometers deep. That's using photons that we blast at the ground. They bounce off molecules, and we get a molecular view of the ground, not just to find minerals, but to understand what's happening in our water table. Where can we use ground source heat? Where are there geological patterns that can cause damage or harm? And how to think about foundations of buildings in incredibly fast ways that are extremely resilient and robust. And we're sort of getting to the edge of where we are in sensing right now. With particle physics, we're actually looking at molecular bonds between atoms, and we're starting to understand what inside those atoms is happening. This is from 1994 to today, a period of 20 years. And the rate of this innovation is doubling every single year, unlike the speed of my clicking through these things. So, we're going to become very familiar with these. How many of you have an iPhone? Shortly, a number of you will have their watch, because you have to. And likewise, Samsung has produced some interesting products, as so many, and we will start to see a massive innovation in human sensing for health. I'm going to give you some more interesting examples. The former speaker was talking about wearables. This is what I would call hyper-wearable. This is a contact lens that gathers its energy from the substances that flow in your eye and creates a radio circuit to communicate data, in this case about diabetes, where you're monitoring on a nanosecond basis the human health and behavior, and this technology will be used in many cases beyond just diabetes. This is where it gets really sexy. This is printing on the human body. It's not a permanent tattoo, but it's using a lithographic process to lay down a printed circuit that is temporary, uses the body heat to figure out how to capture energy, and then measures certain physiological features of your body through your skin. And so we will see these technologies starting to appear in hospitals and for outpatients and for managing people's chronic conditions in the community. What we end up with is a lot of things that can communicate. And one of our challenges is how do we do that well? And how do we do it at the scale that we're talking about? Our former speaker, and I'm sure Boyd, when he speaks, will talk about the immense scale of the data that this leads to, and how do we make sense of it. Here's what we do, and it really does break into these buckets, and I'm going to give you some examples. The first thing we have to do is sense the physical world. And that sensing can go from very simple things, I'm sensing temperature or air quality, to very complex things. Sometimes I'm sensing that thing every few minutes, and sometimes I'm sensing all the time. I'm driving down the car and a child walks into the street, and my car has to sense that there's something in front of me, and I have to make decisions immediately in electronics. The point I get that data, I have to put some context around it, and then I have to make a decision. I have to decide. And this is where we start to see the areas of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Based on what information do I make what decisions at what time? This room could be getting warm because there's a lot of people here, or it could be getting warm because it's very hot outside. We have to act differently depending on those two circumstances. So we have to learn. Then we act. Now, sometimes when we act, it will be perfect, and sometimes it will be imperfect. So we have to capture what we sensed and what we learned, and we have to run analytics, complex machine learning, to say, did we do the best thing in that circumstance, or could we do it better? Can we be more efficient? Can we be cheaper? Can we be better? Can we be safer? And that's really the essence of what we do. Now, part of our genealogy is Formula One. A few years ago, we acquired some technology, which is used for all of Formula One today. You'd wonder why this is relevant to this conversation. Well, Formula One is about the worst place you can put electronics, because it gets really hot to 1,000 degrees. The electronics get vibrated because of that vicious engine in the car. It has to deal with a lot of electromagnetic effect, and it's under a lot of physical forces. But on a Formula One car, you're gathering immense amounts of data and in real time, and I'm streaming that to the pit lane to help define strategy for a race, and I'm sending that data across the world to the manufacturer of the vehicle, so they are monitoring the most intimate aspects of that vehicle, and everything from the physiology of the driver to the heat on the braking system. When you break down a car, some 3,000, 4,000 parts, and we're looking at all of that, from the temperature of the brakes to the airflow over the vehicle to the comfort of the driver. We're looking at every aspect of the engine. We're looking at the powertrain. We're looking at its communications. And we're spitting that information out continually. To give you some idea, the last race in the United States produced 243 terabytes of data. That's the equivalent of the entire Library of Congress over its entire history in that one race. When you expand out, gathering that data in real time and near real time from our urban and smart environments, the volume of that data proliferates massively. Now, it's all very well, like our previous speaker said, data is very important, we have to make sense of it, but there's a challenge with that, because you end up with a lot of data. Secondly, when we start to rely on machines to help us, we've got to know they're going to work. We can't kill somebody in a Formula One car, and we can't send somebody to the moon and have them die. And so we spend a lot of time developing technology for extreme environments so that we can deploy them on this planet. This is a project we just recently launched called Lunar Mission 1, which is launching a spacecraft to do geological research on the moon. And it will be using our technology for control and sensing and communication and analytics. We use these extreme examples to make the technology human-ready on our planet. Now, let me get back to big data for a moment. One of the problems we have with big data, which is associated with large, smart spaces, is we can gather all of this information, we can integrate this information, and then we can't find what is useful in it, because it's impossible to search and process. So one of the other areas that we've been working on at Living Planet is a process known as epigenetics. Epigenetics is the mutation, the natural mutation, the fast mutation and evolution of species. And we're looking at microbes. And they evolve very fast, and they change. But it's possible to start to figure out how they're going to change in very large and interesting ways, and start to predict where they will be. And so we have some technology that uses epigenetics to search very complex fields of information. Forget the bottom bit, which is the epigenetics process. This is just one example, and this is in agriculture. I've got to look at extreme weather patterns, farmers' behaviors. Oh, I'm sorry. I clicked one too many. I have to look at complex weather patterns. I have to look at the geology. I have to look at soil. I have to look at flora and fauna, domesticated crops and animals. I have to look at human, farmer, agricultural worker behavior. I have to look at logistics. I have to look at supply. I have to look at chemicals, fertilizers, and foodstuffs. Lots of really complex things to analyze. And what I'm really trying to figure out is, as world patterns of weather change, how do I adjust my farming so that my yield doesn't go down, or that I don't have catastrophic events, or I don't lose my business, or I don't destroy the soil, or I don't create other environmental unintended consequences. These types of technologies will evolve the way we think about the complex species and the urban environment we live in because we're incredibly complex and we are multidimensional in everything we do. But we need new theory, new mathematical theory, new approaches that start to harness these complex set of attributes. Here's an example of starting to look at that stuff. You've got 14 different dimensions, and one of them is just weather. And weather in itself is highly complex. But what we're trying to find here is what the critical path is. What 2 or 3 things should a farmer do to protect his business and feed his animals and grow his business? We invented something called the edgeless computing framework. And the reason we started down this path, there's a lot of discussion with smart cities about Internet of Things. And it's become probably the most hyped term I've ever seen. Admittedly, for our industry, this new evolution of technology is the largest industry opportunity we have ever had as technologists in software, electronics, in biomedical, whatever it may be. It's very exciting. Trouble is, we tend to think of things in a consumer electronics viewpoint right now. But when you're producing energy or you're monitoring or affecting somebody's heart, this is not a consumer device. It's a highly resilient, absolutely has to work every day of the week problem. And we developed a framework to start to think about those challenges. When you deploy that infrastructure, it's got to work for 30 or 40 years. It's always got to be relied upon. It's going to get attacked. So you have to defend yourself. And so the system has to start to respond to those attacks. It has to age gracefully. It has to evolve. It has to accommodate lots of different innovative technologies, because sometimes Living Planet will be the best company in the world. I hope we remain being that. But somebody may come along and beat us in some areas where they are better than us, and we have to accommodate that in all of our thinking going forward. So edgeless computing for us is the evolution from Internet of Things, as applied to smart cities, to the digital and biological world. I'm not going to talk about this. This is our product. It's boring. Very complex technology. Now, the other thing when you deal with the smart space is there is more theory out there than you've had hot dinners. And you'll hear lots of different perspectives, and they're all right and they're all wrong on some different day of the week. So buyer beware. You've got to go practice this stuff, and you won't get it right. But you've got to innovate and experiment and then improve. And so we've done quite a lot of this work. Firstly, we started in Greenwich in London, then with London City Airport, a different setting. The other was mixed-use development. This is flight operations, security, retail interaction, logistics. This is a large environmental development in Holland. And in one part of the city, we have, our prior speaker was talking about gamification. We have a fountain where kids actually play the whack-a-mole game, where they're controlling the fountain with their iPhones. It's creating some excitement there, but this is looking at energy, water, waste, transportation, building controls, and so on. This is in a retail mall. This is about enhancing human interaction with physical retail, improving security, health, safety, at the same time making data available in real time about things that people want to engage with, while improving the knowledge anonymously of those shoppers for the businesses that are there. This is Hong Kong Airport and an island, quite a big project for us. This is Chengdu. We're involved in the National Healthcare Demonstrator. It's a 154 square kilometer intervention with a city in the center of about 20 square kilometers. We're working on a number of these in China. This is Sao Paulo in the center of the city. And then this is another project of a regional scale. Big growth in Brazil. They've got petrochemicals and a petrochemical cluster, maritime, a navy, rail, automotive, industry that sits around these large territorial areas, no different from what you're seeing within Portugal. How do you harness your citizen, labor force, education, health service, industrial logistics, economic output, with all of those other factors? In this case, large mixed-use communities. These are new. Portugal doesn't have some of the problems that Brazil does today. There are still many people in deep poverty, and they don't have homes, and so building new places is important. And likewise, massive industrial logistics, something that actually Portugal has done pretty well in its logistics infrastructure, but there's no integrated control of those assets and resources today. We spend a lot of time assessing these things. I won't bore you with that, but we always start with economic, social, and environmental outcomes before we start with the technology. Now, we're crazy, geeky technology people. But unless you start here, don't start with your project, because it has to deliver an outcome that is measurable, whether financial, economic in other terms, whether it's social, improvement in services, reduction in healthcare costs, whatever it may be, has to be completely measurable. Then it can be financed, then it can be delivered. We spend a lot of time thinking about the bits, and this is how most municipalities and individual developments go. Firstly, you've got to deal with energy, water, waste. How do I use less of it? How do I use it more efficiently? How do I make it more reliable? How do I extract more value out of it? How do I lose less? How do I push energy around? How do I produce new forms of renewable energy and manage that in the environment? How do I store the energy when I produce it? How do I heat and cool my areas and my districts, my buildings? How do I bring that together with transportation and the rest of the infrastructure? All of these things need to communicate with each other extremely reliably. And so where we are shifting from is this quaint idea of smart to future generations of cities that are orchestrated and are measured and that perform with predictability, but we start to layer those platforms to do other things. This is one example, waste. Today, right now, it either goes in the ground or it goes into a big old incinerator. Here's how that will change in the coming few years. This is not a burning process for waste, it's a microbiological process for waste. And instead of just getting the energy, which you get anyway, and you get more of, you also recover rare earth materials, water, aluminium oxide, vitamins, and a whole range of amino acids that can be used in pharmaceuticals. This is from municipal waste. And they use funky plants like this, very simple to manage, but here the biology is doing the work and not energy systems. We have to do better in cycling water, sensing what I heard from the minister earlier about initiatives in looking at the environment. This will be a critical piece. How do we harvest water? How do we converge and change the physical infrastructure? This is from our project in Brazil, where the intelligence is moved into the road network, and we're managing buildings and energy and water and waste and communications and processing and storage of information in one common way, having massively reduced costs in the process. This is looking at complex mobility systems and how things move around. So I'm going to try to finish on a high note. You can think of smart cities almost like your laptop motherboard of connected things, or an iPhone. An iPhone has a bunch of sensors, has some communications, and it has 4 or 5 things that you measure and use. And there's about 1 million applications that you can download today in everything from health to games to finance, to you name it. Then you layer that thinking onto a common infrastructure in a city. Now I've got 10,000 different types of things I am measuring just in my sensing and actuation. And I'm gathering social media and human communication, a whole range of things. And so we diversify human innovation with the city effectively becoming your iPhone equivalent. What you end up with in that converged infrastructure is basically everything can talk to everything else. The DNA of the city changes. It becomes a tool not only for better operational efficiency, but for new economic growth and innovation. You have a bright idea one day where you can synthesize data from here, here, and here to create value, and you can achieve it, and incredibly quickly. And you end up with all sorts of applications. It's really interesting. Left-hand side, this is, I'll show you a better slide on this in a second. This is monitoring human physiology, where the building is doing the work in the hospital. It's not being done by specialist machines. It's just an app grabbing the data off the building, about your physiology. The other one is monitoring construction equipment as buildings are going up, one for safety, two for productivity and results. Third is actually looking at a built building, and it's giving us real-time data about what it's doing and what it's experiencing. And I can touch that with any tool because it's all built on open data. Bottom one, these are just Microsoft Office applications. Basically, I can take Excel and I can map any data from any of those variants without having to know anything about programming. So you've got specialist tools and you've got tools that all of us can use. You end up looking at data in new and interesting ways, some of it real-time, some of it not, but all of it in context. We look at new ways to actually visualize some of those things. And we can look at really complex engineering things and make it possible for people who don't understand engineering to understand what is going on. Certain things, like street furniture, become highly interactive. They become applications in their own right. They speak to us. They help us when we've got problems. They're giving us information. They're monitoring all sorts of other street conditions. Right, I'm going to need a volunteer. I'll just pick one. How about you? Sitting at the front. Yeah, you. Come join me for a minute. So this is an example, sort of the bleeding edge of where technology is right now. Hello, I'm Steve. Hi. I'm going to point my camera at you, but I'm not taking any pictures, okay? I promise. But what I'm doing is actually pointing this application, which is like this one, Katerina here. And what you're going to see, this is your heart rate, and this is your breathing. If you breathe in deep, you'll see it goes. Okay. Now thank you so much. Thank you. Round of applause for the help. I'm using a standard camera to look at somebody's physiology and determine their heart rate and their breathing. And that same piece of software could easily be doing that on any camera in this room and taking everybody's physiology independently. So we're moving incredibly quickly into this world of deployable things that can have real impact today. We also must not forget social media, because social media creates additional layers of context onto the things that we can physically sense. Somebody will say, I saw some trash in the street. I saw an accident. Somebody was hurt. That information can be processed. One of the most advanced examples of this I've seen in the world is in Turkey, where they're processing social media and they're using it for emergency responders, where they're creating a lot of context around. But this is taking data from my house, where the house is tweeting to me and saying, by the way, somebody just came in, somebody went out, your security is okay, and Bob, who's my dog, just had some water. So we're starting to see these things blend, which becomes sort of interesting. This is work we've done at Birmingham Children's Hospital with our partner McLaren. This is using Formula One electronics and software and our technology to measure the physiology of children in the ICU. The children who are very ill and at great risk, where the building and the environment and the vehicles in which they're traveling to and from that health outcome are monitoring for. This is where materials start to play a key part. This is some technology that is produced by an American company. It's ceramics, but it's highly interactive ceramics that allows us to layer data onto it and make it touchable. These pictures are, the one on the left is a laptop surface projecting content holographically. The right-hand side is changing the glass format so that I'm adding an energy to it to dampen the glass so that I let less light in or more light in, and it's done automatically without blinds and those other things, just by sensing. Here's some other contexts where we're bringing data into your day-to-day life, whether it be on the mirror that's in your bathroom, on your surface of your tables, whether it be at work, or whether it be at home. We won't all deploy all of this technology everywhere, but where there are great use cases, to either enhance quality of life, economic, social, or other outcomes, these technologies will differentiate our cities significantly, whether we're competitive or whether we're not. This is sort of a final example. This is when you bring it all together. Most of us in the world are not software engineers. Most of us are not complex technologists or geeks. So we have to be able to look at the data and say, what information do I need? What process do I need to build so I can manage the outcomes that I want, but I don't want to have to program it. I want to draw what I'm going to do, what I'm going to measure, what decisions have to be made, and then what I do with it. This is an example of just that without programming, where you're mapping out a set of processes in emergency response, and it's gathering the data from the mic on the mic and camera on a police officer's vest. It's gathering the data from the police car, both camera and telemetry for the car moving. It's gathering the microphone data from the overall communications. It's looking at a street camera that's looking at the house where the incident is taking place. And all of that has been pulled together without any programming. It's just an emergency responder operator who knows the best practice and how people should respond, has built a little process, and it's just synthesized the data automatically. Anyway, I'll finish with these couple of points. Firstly, I'm very happy to be here in Portugal. I've been here quite a while, love the food, love the people, love the weather. Bit cold here, it will get warmer, I hope. Our project in Portugal is something that will probably be our life's work. We're working all over the world and we're driving the innovation from here. And so we look for opportunities to work with other innovators who can build solutions, solve problems that we can then replicate those ideas around the world that drives economic value. We're also looking for great talent, and it's something that Portugal has a lot of in the fields that we care in science and technology and biology and other areas. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this was at least a little relevant for you. Thank you.